November 3rd of the Citizen Oversight Board. Thank you everyone for joining today. Just a few things we'll cover to begin with. The first being the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Did anyone have corrections to that? Or if not, we're good to approve them and I can have a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it looks like we had a motion. Sorry, Stefan, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, I moved and then I think April seconded it. Yeah.
Try this way. Cool, thank you. Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
Great, thank you. Sorry, slowest meetings ever. Cool, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Great, any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Moving into kind of board business, a few things that I will want to cover. First off is just sort of update on the hiring process and where we are with all of that. I think we are remiss in posting our timeline to the website, unless Daniel, you did that and we're magic and didn't talk about it, but that'll be something we'll work on for next week so that everyone has access to sort of where we are on that timeline. The next thing is we met with the hiring committee a few weeks ago. And so moving along with that group, we also met with the recruiting firm beginning of last week to sort of talk about where we are with candidates, keeping the position open a few extra days. I think we got three additional candidates, so that's great news. And the recruiting firm now is going through a process where they vet and interview folks to kind of see their basic fit for the role. They will then give a slate of candidates to the hiring committee late December, and then the hiring committee will commence to schedule interviews with top candidates there. So that's all moving along and feeling good about that process. I think we had a good selection and lots of candidates applying. So that's great news. Our next step as a hiring committee is to meet next week to talk about the rubric for selecting our candidates. So what are we looking for, and how do we align on all sort of looking for the same things in the candidate. So that is, I think, next Friday, either next Thursday or next Friday, and then we'll go from there. What I'm also thinking in terms of the board's role in hiring is the formation of a hiring committee. I think it'll be unwieldy for us to have 9 people's schedules and interviews with a candidate. And so what I'd like to propose to the board and discuss here is, do we think it's appropriate for us to create a subcommittee of folks who are committed to, opening their calendars, et cetera, for going through that interview process. So throwing that out there, wanting to hear from board members on, do you think that's a good idea? And, can we proceed with that?
Julia, I have a question. Would this largely be our subcommittee? We would be interviewing the 3 finalists that the hiring committee comes up with after going through the process that you described?
That's right. Yep. The hiring committee will receive probably a slate of like 8 to 10 folks from the recruiting firm. We'll narrow that down to top 3. And those top 3 will not only be interviewed by the COB, but then also will likely be the candidates to go through the public process. So community engagement and also meeting with public safety departments, et cetera.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The idea that I am having is really similar to the approach we took to interviewing Daniel, right? So certain members are saying, I'm going to devote the time to this and keeping my calendar open for big blocks of time to do those interviews.
I'll participate in that subcommittee.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any objections to the concept of a subcommittee? Go ahead, Nikki. I think you were going to say something.
Katina, you go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I had a question actually before we proceed with making the decision. I think I want to know what you envision for the committee's role and obligations to the larger board, right? Because it's going to ultimately be the board's responsibility to make the decision about appointment. So if only part of the board is engaged in this interview process, how do we ensure that the right information is shared, the complete information? I don't know. I'm on the fence right now about, I understand the logistics issue that you're raising, but also if this body has this, very sobering, responsibility to appoint the next monitor, I feel like we'll have to be thoughtful about how we share information if not all board members are engaged in the interviewing process.
Yeah, I thought about that as well. I've been on a number of boards hiring an executive director, and I've actually never been on a board that uses the entire board as part of that hiring process. And so a few things in my experience that I've seen, that hiring committee, comes then with a final recommendation to the board, and the board makes a decision, as a full complement on that committee's recommendation. I guess the corollary question to the group would be, if we choose to have the whole board participating and not all board members are on all of the interviews or are on interviews in general, are we actually using the full board for that purpose? Like, does that create a null process if, people don't show up or can't attend or things like that? So the reason for the subcommittee is, these are a set of folks who are committed to attending every meeting and can free up their schedules to do that. And then the board itself would make the final decision based on the recommendation of that. But I'm open. If we think that's a bad idea, we can, work through the schedules. That's entirely possible as
well. A way to do this may be not really a compromise. I mean, I think the process you're describing works fine. I mean, I think that there are board committees all the time that undertake a role of hiring and then recommending to the full board, what they can, who they're recommending to be hired to the candidates. But you're right. Katina's right. There should be a full reporting process so the board was fully informed. But we could do it where you have a subcommittee and then all other board members are also welcome to attend any of the meetings if they're able to. And that way you could expand the group that's interviewing as well on a volunteer basis.
So how within the subcommittee does the decision get made, which of the 310? Is it just a simple majority vote?
Yeah, I think we could do any number of, I mean, if it's at least 3 people, I think we'd look for an odd number. Majority could work. I haven't typically been part of a process where there's disagreement on the best candidate. So that might be a different problem actually. But yeah, I mean, we could make it as complicated or as simple as we'd like in terms of, the committee.
I guess I have some concern to piggyback on Katina's exploration. If it's only a subcommittee of, say, 3 with the possible public perception that, 2 people have essentially picked the next independent monitor. I know that nonprofit boards and other types of boards use this process a lot. It seems like a pretty big appointment for a board to make, though I think we need to be really careful.
Okay. Sounds like we probably need more discussion on this. So take that idea back. Let's think about making a decision in our next meeting, if that's okay. And if this isn't the right call, then that's fine. If we are going to go ahead.
Could we assess maybe via email how many members of the board realistically can open up their schedule so we can get a sense of participation? And also, are you anticipating most of these interviews will take place in December, or is December sort
January?
of a January?
Yeah, it should be like middle to late January. The hiring committee is getting resumes like the 20th, 22nd. We'll look at those. So the committee will be doing interviews probably the 2nd week in January. So it would be the 3rd or 4th week in January by the time the committee would be able to the COB committee or full board would be.
And so because I think we're the appointing body, Julia, I think I'm wondering, right, the selection committee is going to provide its 3 names. Are we going to have the community process and then the board does the interview, or were you envisioning it the other way around?
Yeah, I think the way that the timing works out, the board would do its interviews first, and then the community meetings would be early February. So they would be sort of, I mean, not concurrent processes, but fairly tight. And then the community would provide their recommendations and feedback to the board, and the board could take that in addition to its own, interview results.
Right. Okay. I do think, I mean, I'm open. I actually am willing to, commit to the extent I'm still here to be on the committee to participate in the interviews, because I think it's critical that everyone hear what the candidates have to say. But my other question was, I believe that Dr. Alexander had worked on sort of a matrix of concepts, ideas, issues of concern. Are we sort of feeling like that's something that we would just now use for our appointment, or is that something we're feeling like we need to communicate to the steering or the selection committee?
Say more about that in April. Maybe you can speak to that. I can't remember what that is.
And probably at this point in time, we might need to even revisit it, because I know I can't remember exactly what I placed into it, even though we all approved it. But I think that was initially for the hiring committee to use in their rankings of the applicants. We might need to consider if we want a different type of rubric for community to fill out and provide feedback. So I would just like everybody's opinions on that part.
Yeah, let's recirculate that. I also think that is coming back to my mind. So thank you for bringing that up, Katina. I was like, I can't remember 2 months ago. So I think that the recruiting firm also used that in the development of the candidate profile as well, right? So communicating that to the public, we did a bunch of interviews with staff from the OIM, and I think other conversations. Is that right, April? To build that rubric? Yeah.
Yeah, that was from the conversations we had with various constituents that we had interviewed during the early stages.
Okay, perfect. And the idea was, what are we looking for in the next monitor, and what are those attributes, skills, et cetera, that we might be looking for in that person.
I'll resend it to everybody now.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, sending that around would be awesome. And then I believe that we got that to the hiring committee. Sorry, too many committees now. And the recruiting firm for the purpose of developing that profile. But yeah, that's awesome. I forgot that we had that, so that'll be a good ready artifact for us. So yes, the committee could refresh that. The other thing about the committee is like no limitation on the number of members. It's more about who can commit. So anyway, let's continue to talk about that, and we can meet in our next meeting to finalize the decision on how we want to proceed. I think the short story is if we don't go to a smaller committee approach, or at least the interviews, then the ask is that board members begin to put holds on their calendars for the last 2 weeks of January, so that we can conduct interviews with a full complement of the board, and we'll need members to show up to that. So if you're feeling like, oof, I'm supposed to take a vacation then, or I've got busy work schedule, that's part of the reason why I'm wondering about a subcommittee, is if we can actually. Okay, thanks for that discussion. The second item for discussion is actually focusing some smaller committee attention on the process of our strategic plan and retreat. So Daniel has created a nice quick request for quote that we'll use to solicit a third party to support this process. And I'm wondering if there are board members who are particularly passionate about, building a strategic vision and want to sort of lead that. I need help on the level of work here because this hiring process is a lot, and I also have 2 full-time jobs in addition to this. So need a board member to step up to really work with Daniel and potentially, our third party support for that initiative. Anyone interested in leading that work?
So you're soliciting someone to help formulate the agenda for the retreat?
Yeah, so we have money to hire an outside firm to help us work through the strategic planning process. So Daniel's put together an RFP or a request for quote. April and I have looked at that. I'm happy to take other feedback. The idea would be we'd release that, we'd get a few firms to reply to that. And then the leader of the strategic plan subcommittee would help to select the vendor, meet with the vendor to set up, what do we think this is? What does the deliverable look like in terms of the plan? What might a day or the retreat or workshop look like? And, working through logistics, et cetera. Obviously, Daniel will support a lot of the administration of that, but needing someone to take point on just all of that activity. The last thing would be, once we have our convening, a workshop, retreat, whatever we want to call it, making sure to work with the vendor that, we get a deliverable out of that and that we're happy with the results. Does that make sense? All right, so think about that. And we will, I'll probably follow up over email to make sure that we've got a lead on that. There's no rush on that retreat other than, the faster we can get aligned as a board, the faster we can begin to work in alignment with our big goals. So, if we feel like, oof, it's tough with the hiring process at the same time, we can delay this until spring or whatever, but just need somebody to help think through that. So.
We also probably need to see the timeline for the new board members because I would hate to have a retreat and then onboard new folks at the same time.
A great point. Daniel, I think you had an update on that, so you want to go into that now?
Yeah, I have just a couple of quick hits I can run through. With the new board members, I did hear from the COB nominating committee Wednesday, and they said that they are very close to submitting their first slate of candidates to City Council. I would imagine that would be over the weekend or early next week. And then it's in City Council's hands to move as fast as they would like on that. Assuming that they do select one of those from the first slate, the other 2 would be returned to the main candidate pool and a second slate would be prepared. That process, depending on if there are how many new candidates there are, could go fairly quickly, but I would not anticipate both positions being filled until at least late February at the very earliest, probably looking at March. Just given City Council timelines, I'm guessing. So that's speculation, but we are getting closer to one of the positions, the first position being filled. So that's item number 1.
Can I interrupt? Sorry. So I think April's point makes great sense. I think we should defer the retreat until spring, when it looks like we'll have 2 new board members on board, and then we don't have to do this twice and we can all do it together. I think that, and also to your point, Julia, then we can completely focus on the hiring process for the new independent monitor early next year.
Okay, update number 2 is we do now have a public calendar on our website under our public meetings page, where you wouldn't have to, but you can encourage community members or any community members watching. You can link that calendar to your own personal digital calendar, so that interested parties can always have the Zoom link available and know when the next meeting is. And even if we have guests and what sort of stay on top of that, rather than having to rely on their memory of, oh, it's the first or third Friday, or that, or relying on our social media outreach. So we do have that sort of synchronizable calendar available now. Third thing is we did receive, so after last board meeting, we did follow up with Sheriff Diggins with a couple of additional document requests. He has provided most of those just this week due to some staff time off. It will be full. He said he'll get the rest of the documents to us, specifically the food service monthly reports will be delivered early next week. So I will make sure that the full board gets those to review. And then the final thing is I did hear back from Denver Health just this morning. They have declined to join us either on the 17th or ever, and have stated that they're happy to work with the sheriff to support any requests that we have, but they're going to be working with the sheriff and not with us primarily, in slightly different words. I did take a look at their annual reports to the city, and it seems like they do have part of their agreement with the city is that, oh, I have the language right here. They have to report on whether or not they meet the criteria of attending, quote, any meetings as deemed necessary by the jail administrator or the health and hospital authority. So if we can, one option would be to work with Sheriff Diggins and ask that he essentially request or deem it necessary that they meet or have a meeting with all three parties present, which would essentially, I believe, compel them to attend. Otherwise, another option would be to send them written questions and hope that they engage with that. We could also, a more aggressive option, follow-up option would be some sort of public letter or press release about the board this being a very important issue, medical treatment that the board has heard concerns about, and is unable to sort of understand or get to the bottom of what these medical treatment policies are, who's making them, and what happens if they are violated. So we can have, I don't know if we want to open up for a discussion about what the best follow-up option is there, or if we should do that via email later, but those are my updates.
I definitely want to document that they're refusing to come to this public forum because it was something that was brought up in a public space and can continue to be a dangerous situation. I do want to have some form of a meeting with them if it is with Sheriff Diggins, because I think we're held accountable too, since this was brought up in our space, to make sure that we are having a response and having answers to the community about, again, the situation that we heard about.
Can I make a suggestion? I think sometimes in big organizations, and I'm speaking from experience, sometimes the leadership at the top is the last to hear about it, and it's after it blew up. So I would recommend you all like calling the CEO's office, just so they are aware, and maybe doing even a, I don't know. I think sometimes when you go through the whole gamut of folks that, there's different opinions on what should be done. And I think most of the time, folks that are in leadership want to have the conversation and want to hear and want to, figure out how to solve. So that would be my recommendation and yeah, I've had some of the same challenges, but I would also say that I think that going up there could be, because I know I've talked to Robin and I've talked to Dr. McVeigh, other folks multiple times about really tough issues, and I think that they'd be willing to talk to you. So
Appreciate that very much. Thanks for the recommendation. I agree with April. We don't have authority over Denver Health, right? So this isn't a meeting where we're, a punitive meeting. This is a meeting where the board's trying to understand the interaction between these two organizations in the city and get smart. And then, where we do have authority in, the sheriff's office, asserting that appropriately and having the right conversation. So agree. I'm happy to, put a letter together, or I think something written is nice, and then a follow up with a phone call to the leadership there. Just, this is a friendly invite about something that feels important to the oversight that we provide. So I think that feels like an acceptable approach. Go ahead, Katina.
Yeah, I think this is all a wonderful discussion. I appreciate everyone's points. Thank you, Director Murphy, April, Julia, you guys are all right. I think I just wanted to add a historical context, which is there is precedent for, the board inviting individuals who, of course, we have no authority to. We've met with the district attorney, for example, and we've met, with the city attorney. So we met with people who we don't have any authority over, but we're really, it's because of the nature of our work, the scope of our work. So hopefully that letter is compelling enough to get them to change their mind.
Great. So let's take that as an action item. Daniel, you and I can draft a letter, and we'll circulate that to the board, and then we'll do a follow-up over email and phone as well to the leadership there. So thank you for that.
To clarify, that would be a letter to Denver Health or a letter to Sheriff Dickens?
I think it'd be Denver Health with a copy to the sheriff.
And I'd love to assist as well.
Great. Thank you, April. Okay. I think that's all we have for board business. That's enough board business for one day. And let's move into our topic with our shared guests, the Department of Public Safety here. So just for community context, we have been working collaboratively with the department to evaluate the current public integrity division policies, and that's the kind of internal affairs review body that helps to process complaints that may come in, or disciplinary matters for members. So there has been, years of conversation on this topic between our two organizations, and this is probably the latest round of conversations about that. So for those who are new to the context and maybe attending this meeting as a guest, the department provided some policies for our review. And first of all, I'll just say we really appreciate the collaboration on that and the transparency in sharing that information, and then hearing our feedback. We provided a letter to the department with our response and thoughts on that set of policies and policy decisions. The department has provided back their response and approach to our feedback. And so we will have some specific conversations today about that, and then some general conversations about it, because some of that information is deliberative in nature. And so we may need to take some of it to our executive session, just so we're not getting out of sync with, a draft process. But my thought is, Director Murphy, to turn it over to you and for you to sort of highlight, where you are, what your thinking is based on this, feedback conversation that we're having. And then, I'm hoping to hit on just a couple of topics in this meeting when we're ready. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it does.
Great.
Thank you so much, Julia, and good to see everyone here. There's a piece of context I also want to give Julia, about the PID and its formation, and that is that these policies were actually drafted by a external body than with the department prior to me being here, but it was put together with community stakeholders, with a bunch of folks. And that's where these policies came from. It was, I don't know, Karen, when was that? Jesus, my time is all running together, but it was probably around 8 months to a year ago where Karen said, okay, so you guys adopted that first bout of policies. Are you going to let us review them again to really get in depth in some of the things we weren't able to change? And out of my bout of making sure that I put my money where my mouth was, to making sure that we use the COB for policy review for those things, I said absolutely. And I'm thrilled because I think a lot of good conversation has come from it. Tough conversations and lots of challenges and things that I didn't even think about through this. And I think that's the whole point of this whole process. And so I wanted to say thank you, number one, Karen, for challenging me back in the day when I was brand new, but also for allowing for us to have this continued dialogue. That is what makes the COB special and what makes that collaboration with the department so valuable. And so I actually asked Armando Soldate, one of my deputies, to lead up this process, as you all know. And so I'm going to actually hand it to him to kind of go over some of the answers and some of the things that were of contention. And then let's just have open dialogue conversation, and looking forward to continuing this really good but tough conversation. Armando.
Thank you, Murphy. Thank you, Julia and board. I've been involved in this and PID the policies initially with the Executive Advisory Board, and thank you, Nikki, for her participation in that board that lasted for quite some time. And that was when and even prior to that, we had a performance improvement team around back then, which was an IA function, internal affairs function, that was under the Denver Sheriff Department. And what really led to former Executive Director Troy Riggs to form that team and to look into some performance improvement there was, we had this astounding data that showed half the department, I think it was 53% of Denver Sheriff deputies, were under investigation. And there was another high percent that were in multiple investigations. And the case timelines were really lagging. And as we all know, for effective discipline, you need a discipline process that's thorough and complete, but also that is timely. If you're getting disciplined for a matter, for a mistake that you made, and you're getting disciplined over a year later, it could have some very negative consequences, negative impacts on the employee, morale, all sorts of things. So those were the issues that we were really facing. When we first took this on, we started meeting with the Executive Advisory Board. We've had a lot of great conversations, and like Murphy said, that was community involved. We had employee representation involved. All people were brought to the table, and we got through a lot of things. As Murphy said, that policy, that initial round of policies, where we had come to, I would say, not a clear consensus on a lot of matters, but the same issues that we're talking about today, that we're going to talk about here in a minute, were the same ones back then that we did not have agreement on. And that are the ones that I'm here to talk to you about: our triage, participation by COB in the contemplation of discipline meetings. And those were the two really big ones that I know, dating back to when we first started this, all the way going back to 2018, have lingered and kept going and continue to be a problem today. I will tell you that this department, and under Murphy's leadership, we've really evolved in that space of how we are going to intake complaints. We have really, I will tell you, the first thing is the resistance or whatever we're getting from our internal affairs unit or now in our administrative investigative unit is not that we don't want to investigate these matters. It's not that we don't want to open up investigations. The fact of the matter is we have a finite number of investigative resources that we can devote to these cases. We also don't want to open up so many like we had in the past, and that we cannot effectively manage them. We cannot effectively get them through a process. We also wanted to focus those finite resources on the most significant cases. In the Executive Advisory Board, I heard from folks like Pastor Robert Davis and others that they wanted those finite resources, the investigative resources focused on those significant issues that they've seen from the Denver Sheriff Department, and that is around uses of force. If there were bias cases, those were the things they wanted the PID, the Public Integrity Division Administrative Investigation Unit, to focus on. And that other matters, the less serious matters, they wanted to be handled by direct supervision. And we wanted the same, and that direct supervision of first line supervisors in the jail. We needed to have first line supervisors in the jail do their job of managing folks. And that's when we also had that debate on the subject of performance management. Is this a performance thing or is this a misconduct thing? And that was another dialogue that we had. I'll tell you, I'll just cut to the chase on the triage process. I've had very good conversations with our independent monitor, Greg Crittenden, and Matt Butis, who are on the call. I've had great conversations also with the AIU director, Greg Huff. Really been talking about this, as you all know, and as Murphy has told you about, I've been conducting an internal review of the PID, and I've been interviewing all stakeholders, including OIM, including all the investigators and reviewers in the department, all the way to transcriptionists, trying to really get an understanding of the department. One of my big focuses has been the triage process. It really has been the triage process and the deficiencies there. We do realize, and as you saw, we realize that the current process is deficient. It's not ideal. It's not what we want. We don't want cases slipping through the cracks or matters slipping through the cracks where there's not an appropriate level of oversight on the decisions that are being made to make something a formal investigation or to pass it back to the department to either handle through the grievance process or through first line supervision. So we found, and I thank Greg Crittenden and Matt and all of the monitors who have been critical in providing us good examples here in the Department of Safety that we can go back, see the scope of the problem, and sharing their concerns with us. So we've understood that. One of the things that I've done with that is saying, okay, we're not going to continue in this new year, as we're getting to this new year and 1/1 of 2022, we're going to start a new triage process. We will enter everything into IA Pro, and when I mean everything, that is every complaint that AIU receives will be entered into IA Pro. They will be entered in right now as complaint cases. Not everyone will be open as full investigations, but now I think it'll be more transparent for obviously, our OIM partners have direct access to that. They can see that. They can see the videos. They can see the grievances. They can see those things that are coming to the decision of, are we making this a investigations? A lot of times when we talk about, and I know there's also some debate on clear and convincing and incontrovertible and all those things. And Nikki, I remember having these debates way back during the executive advisory board, and we really couldn't even come to a conclusion on what that was about. But I think we really, a lot of times in these cases that they do decide that they don't merit a case, the video from the jail can clearly show you that it didn't happen the way it's being alleged in a grievance. So that, that's the things that will be connected to this, connected to the complaint. It will also help us in our early intervention systems, the early intervention scenes. If, we keep getting the same deputy involved in the same type of complaints, there's a lot of interventions and warnings that can come across that can alert the sheriff's department. And so that's what we're doing. However, and that's what we're doing regardless on January 1st, 2022. And then those formal cases will be made formal cases. They will be A cases. The other ones will be C complaint numbers. So we'll have an idea of how many are becoming in as complaints and how many are becoming actual cases. And then we're also going to relate them. So the C case that becomes an A case, we're going to relate it in the A case so that we know how many of those complaints became full cases. And so we're going to be doing that. And I can discuss, I don't want to get into the full weeds here, but we could have plenty of discussions on that and can explain a process of how that's going to go prior to us implementing it in 2022. The other thing that I think is really exciting, which, because one of the things and one of the resistance for us implementing this in the past has been, it is a big, the administration of that is pretty tedious, and it can get overwhelming. And I'm not saying that, you know, just the one case and putting in video and all that is a lot, but when you multiply that by a lot of times, it becomes a lot. So what I think is a hopeful opportunity for us, and I shared this with Greg Crittenden and Matt, and I also shared the material the vendors sent us, is that IA Pro, which is our case management software that we utilize, has a new functionality, a new module that they just announced at their recent national conference in November. We did not attend due to budget, but we have been in communication with the vendor. They have provided us a slide presentation, which I've shared with the OIM. And it is a public portal module. So basically, it is a module where the public can enter complaints. They are uploaded into IA Pro directly. They are given their case number. They are given a contact number. They can be made up to date. I think this also goes towards some of those reform recommendations that we're getting from the Reimagining Policing and Public Safety Task Force about knowing and getting in contact. And I think we've heard it from you all too, that, you know, people make a complaint and they never hear about it, or they don't hear what the outcomes. So this will really hopefully provide that accountability, this module. Also, the module is built for oversight. And in the slide presentation that I shared with you, while there's not a lot of details in it, but it's built off an NYPD model, I think, where it has an oversight function. And so we are arranging right now a demo from the vendor, which I've invited Greg to. We're getting a bid. Obviously, this will be an unbudgeted thing, but I have found that the vendor, working with them in the past, since I've been here, that this isn't a really pricey software, so I don't expect it to be, hopefully, the financial cost of this, adding this module to it. I hope that won't be a hurdle for us. Hopefully we can absorb that. But I'm really excited about this opportunity to have that. And so my plan is, and speaking with everyone involved so far, is that we're going to test it. We're going to get a quote on it. We're going to get the demo, and that is as soon as possible. I've asked them, and you know, we reached out to them before the Thanksgiving holiday. I wanted to wait to schedule the time until I talked to Greg. I talked to Greg just after the holiday, and then once I talked to them, we asked them for the time. So we're hopefully going to get that demonstration time. If any of you all want to be invited to that, I'm more than happy to pass that along. I just say with calendars, as you guys were talking about logistics and your thing, I wish I could try to accommodate everyone's calendar. I'm going to try to accommodate. I know Greg's calendar is a priority. I need him there. I need certain people there. So I will do my best to accommodate. And then we got to accommodate the vendor as well, right? They're dealing with folks all. So I want to get that demo up. The other thing I like about it is it's highly customizable. And so with that, a lot of times their platform hasn't been customizable, particularly in our different, you know, we have the OIM, which a lot of departments across the country do not. And so we've really, you know, I hope that we can really tailor this for us. So I have a lot of hope in this. I have a lot of, I really think it meets a lot of needs, particularly with community, but particularly here with our triage process, and particularly helping lift that administrative tasking of, you know, the complaint's going to be really kind of entered into IA Pro, and now we can start tagging things to them, like uploading video and doing things like that. And then maybe we could even, and I have further ideas, and maybe even when the sheriff's department sends over complaints or managerial kind of things over to AIU, they also use this portal. And same with the OIM, when Taniqua gets in a complaint or goes through the mail in the OIM and they get a grievance sent to them instead of the email chain that goes sent over to AIU, hopefully we can start using this. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's going to hopefully be very helpful for us in this space of triage and getting the oversight that we want of it. But that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. That is first, that regardless if that module is ready, which it won't be, I know it won't be ready by 1/1, we are going to institute, and this is with full agreement from the AIU and from the direction of Murphy in this office, that we're going to start instituting that. The other thing I want to ask of you all, and I've already asked this of Greg and Matt, is I want to keep some close eye on this process, because the reticence from AIU has been, well, we're going to make these cases, or we're going to put these in, and they're going to make us open every one as a case. And then we're right back to have the department under investigation and timelines out the door, and our limited resources are stretched thin. And so I really appreciate, though, that you all have offered support. If we see this, and we see that we need resources, we need a new FTE, we need that. I think that's critical, because if we're seeing that, yes, by doing this, there are real cases that we do need to open that merit full case opening, and that means we're going to need FTE. I appreciate that, and I will come with you if that's something that we see. But how I want us to see it is, I want us to see it in January and February before we see it in June, and we're now 500 cases deep, and we're now buried under cases. So I'm asking, and I appreciate Greg, he's always been so helpful in working together on this. I'm asking the monitor, his delegate, whoever, that we meet 2 weeks out. So January 14th, January 15th, whatever that business day is, we meet, we monitor what's happened in this first 2 weeks. And then we monitor monthly from there, what's happening. Are we opening the right case? I would like to extend the invitation to you all too. I think it's important that we know that community. We need to know what you all expect to be investigated, right? We can all say those things. We can all say it's important that we're investigating this. But I think we all come to the agreement on those serious misconduct matters. It's those other ones that we want to look at. And the other thing I'm happy to report, and I talked about this in our executive advisory board towards the latter part, is back then our public integrity division director, Dave Walcher, was really asking for more review of sheriff use of force cases. So we have expanded that. So now he has a full-time staff person that reviews every use of force, reported use of force case and the video associated with it. So that's a big development, because we weren't doing that back a year ago. That wasn't happening. Now we're not waiting for the sheriff's department to send over that. We get a report of a use of force report, and they have a person that is reviewing every use of force to see if we need to investigate that use of force. So those are things I think are really positive steps. I think Murphy wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to add too that there have been cases that have come out of that have not, been given by the sheriff's office per se, or we catch it before anybody else catches it because of that process. So I want to put that out there, because that is good. That we are able to do that in that triage process. So that's it. Thanks, Armando. And I want to make sure, Armando, we're coming up with that time, so I want to make sure we actually can answer their questions. So.
Yep, okay. Yep.
Armando, for the board to be able to, honor your request and fully participate and say we, agree that the right cases are or aren't being opened, is it your intention then to make a login for each board member to this new IA Pro module?
You know what? We'd have to discuss that. We'll see. I'm definitely open to something like that. In these meetings, what I'm really hoping for is that we have I don't think it should be a case by case. I think where there's areas of disagreement, like in those discussions that they're having now in triage, they have areas where the monitor may say, you know what, I think this should be opened. And AIU says, well, we don't think so. I think I'd really like to have an open discussion, not just between the AIU director and Greg, but between all of us, so we can provide them guidance on what is important, and especially that community voice, what is important, because I think we can all realize there are limited resources here, and I think we're coming in good faith to say we do want to investigate everything that merits the case. We do want to see these things, but we do have limits in what we can do at this time. So
I would also like to add that I think Armando is right on, but I also think it's important that the board remain a board, right? I think that as soon as you guys get into operational areas, which I believe is where Greg's role is, and that's your one of your main focuses is making sure Greg is portraying and doing the things that you all are seeing. That is the whole point of the board overseeing Greg. I think that's that conduit that also needs to happen there. And so I worry, frankly, about there being, I don't know how many people are on your board, 14 different opinions about what needs to occur and how it needs to occur. And then, there being confusion on who has the authority and who had the, I don't want that. I want it to be more of that open dialogue about, okay, so we've seen a number of these types of cases. Murphy, Greg, Armando, we need you to make sure you're investigating those instead of saying, oh, this specific deputy did this, go ahead and investigate that. Does that make sense? So making sure we stay at, I would say 50,000 feet as opposed to 10,000.
Yeah, I would also suggest that the board is somewhat bandwidth limited and that we're also appointing another monitor right now. We have other tasks. So I doubt you're going to see, there's 9 of us, I doubt you're going to see 9 people culling through the depths of any one deputy's file. But I think it would be a significant indicator of good faith to give us access to the actual data. And it would indicate that you're not just asking us to rubber stamp your decisions, because frankly, if we come into a meeting with Greg and with the Department of Safety, and we're shown a case that there's disagreement on that we've never had a chance to look at before, or we aren't able to say, hey, here's a case I had a question about, then we're actually not really prepared for the meeting. And that doesn't set us up to improve the process. And it doesn't really set you guys up either to show that oversight is functioning to make your system better.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand those points. Thanks, Nikki.
To follow up on Nikki's point, I mean, we hear you in terms of perhaps somewhat unwieldy nature of making IAPRO, accessible to the entire board. But at a minimum, and I think this was in our last letter to you all, we asked that our administrator, who is a full-time now city employee, be given access to IAPRO. That can streamline things and get us information, per Nikki's point, that we would want to review and be brought to our attention, either by our administrator or Greg, while you're considering whether to provide broader access to a greater number of board members.
No, that I think that's a really good solution that we should try to implement. Yep.
I love that, actually, because there ain't nothing to hide, guys. Like this,
Yeah.
this is.
Yep.
I am I want to make sure everybody understands in the public, because I know you all, but I am the civilian oversight of the Department of Public Safety. That is my job. That is the Department of Executive Director. That is what we are and what we do. And it only really expands and allows for even better partnership when we have people like Daniel or all of you to be a part of that process and help us figure out where we need to hone in on, because we don't see or know everything. So I welcome it. I think it's good.
And Director Robinson, just to follow up on your point, I totally appreciate that you're a civilian, you're not a sworn officer. And so maybe it's better in our conversations going forward if we talk about independent oversight instead of civilian oversight, because you are an appointee of the mayor and you are a boss of the sheriff and of the chief of police. So independent oversight is meant to have a system to check that is outside of that line of hierarchy and that line of allegiances. And I appreciate your role so much and how much transparency you've worked to bring to this process.
That was well said. I love that. Very well said.
Just a few notes from me. So the first thing is thank you so much for your receptivity to our feedback on using a system to track these things. I'm going through a home renovation right now, and I think to myself, can you imagine if all these permits were tracked in a spreadsheet, right? You'd have no idea what was permitted. And so, having a technology tool that can, track, manage, analyze this information is essential to the effectiveness of this oversight. And we recognize that there's additional administration involved in that. There also may be less administration involved in that than a spreadsheet over time, right? So there's probably some onboarding of the staff, but then maybe easier to manage later. Your office is on record from our last interaction and saying that you weren't going to do this. So you may consider revising the memo that you provided to us to confirm your commitment to that. And we're happy to write a memo back saying we heard you say this, and we'll hold you to that. So if you want to, revise your approach, we're open to that. So that's the first thing. Second thing, Stefan mentioned, let's have Daniel. He is paid to do this, and I cannot possibly imagine myself culling through that database. I do not have time for that, and I'm not sure what I'd find if I was looking anyway. So he's a great fit for that. And if you're having a meeting and a demo, I'd appreciate if you could invite him to that process as well.
Absolutely.
The second thing is thank you for your responsiveness to our request to log every complaint. We had two things that were really extremely important to us. One, using a system versus a spreadsheet, and the second was making sure that everything is logged. Just sort of getting to the root at why we care about that. We're really interested in making sure that those who are in powerful situations in the community are held accountable for their behavior, right? So that's at the baseline. We want to make sure that we have a way to understand the actions of folks, in your line of authority, and a way to discipline them if they step out of line there. I think, of note, and a reason for putting it in a system is we care a lot about making sure that, perpetual bad actors are identified and weeded out. And it's very hard to suss that out in a spreadsheet, right? But if we're seeing the same name or the same behavior show up in that tool over and over, perhaps we identify training opportunities, or folks who are maybe not kind of getting it when it comes to policy. And then we want to make sure that people are disciplined when it is required and when it's established by policy. So for us, it's less about creating this mega database of anybody who's ever had a complaint against them, and more about the actions that are taken because of the complaints that come in. Really excited about the opportunity for a public portal and an easy complaint process for the community. That feels very exciting, and anything we can do to advocate on that, happy to support. The last thing I'll say is recognizing your feedback on this may take more staff or more time. Let's have that conversation as you're onboarding folks to this new tool. And if you're seeing gaps in that, we're happy to serve as an advocate to council to make sure that you have the staff you need to fulfill the duties that you have. And so, I'd rather us not get to June and for you all to say we've overwhelmed ourselves and we don't have the staff to do this right. And now we've got a mess of data in the system. So, let's stay in touch as we kind of enter into this together to make sure that we are collaborating where you need help.
I also told Greg this about staffing is FTE on the investigative side may also require FTE on his side of the house. They need to have the ability to monitor these as well. So I think we need to keep that in consideration.
That's excellent. Thank you. Stefan, I see your hands up.
And I was muted too. Sorry. Thank you, Julia. Can I make a suggestion, Armando? I really drilled down on I know we provided comments before, sort of on the CRU policy, but I was looking at it and I want to reiterate Julia's comments. We very much appreciate the changes that you're going to make as a result of our input. Really very helpful, particularly on the IA Pro issue. But I was drilling down on this issue, which we haven't yet discussed, and it may be subject to some legal issues we need to discuss in executive session having to do with the guaranteed participation of citizens on disciplinary boards. But in that context, I looked again at the CRU policy. And to me, the policy is a bit disjointed. There's no clear description of the case flow consistent with the flow chart that, for example, when we gave input to Director Murphy before, there's this great flow chart, which I think that is now on the website, by the way, which goes through the entire process from investigation to final order of discipline. If you look at that CRU policy, you can't follow the flow at all. And in fact, the one thing that is completely unclear, it is unclear on when or why a contemplation of discipline meeting would even take place. You have a section in there where you go, which is good, where you go through the managing the case flow, and you have the results there where you got the investigator reviewing the file, you have the investigator making recommendations, you have OIM looking at it, there could be a disagreement, and then ultimately, the sheriff gets involved, and then the executive director makes the call. And then in a later section, you talk about, well, there's a contemplation of discipline meeting. It's hard for me to follow, who has some knowledge of the issue. The public could never follow that. It really needs to flow like your flow chart. So it's explained, again, how and why a COD meeting would even take place. And in any event. So I also, you may want to, when I was drilling down last night, just a administrative thing, when I was trying to look at the sheriff disciplinary handbook, it's not on the website. You have the PD handbook in both links, both the link for the PD handbook, disciplinary handbook, and the sheriff handbook. So I couldn't even look at that to see what it said about contemplation of discipline meetings and the like. So you may want to just correct that and put that in there.
We'll get that fixed. And thank you for the points on that, on the flow and thing. Actually, as part of the internal review that Murphy's had me do, that's actually one of my findings that I'm going to be recommending to Murphy, is that we establish a more clearer flow, because like you said, it's hard for you and you're informed in this space. It was hard for me, and I've been in this space for a long time, but could you imagine the public as well, but also our deputies, right? The deputy that have to navigate this process. And a lot of that also wears on them, like if you don't understand when you get a case, what that means for your career and all those things. So in fact, that's one of my preliminary findings. I actually quickly came to that in talking to the people that I've been talking to for their feedback. So thank you.
I just want to say, along with what Armando just said, is thank you. Because that's number one, a good analysis, Stefan, but it needs to happen. It absolutely needs to happen. All the things you just said. And so Armando, if we can, I thank you for letting me know that's part of your preliminary findings. Yep. But I look forward to that because I honestly, coming in, I actually had this observation myself, and I was wondering if it was just me, because I had to understand the disciplinary process because I had to enact it, right? And I didn't. I had to have Mary sit down with me and go through, and that's when we actually created the flow chart. But to your point, let's make it a little more simple, but also make it consistent. And then let's definitely post the sheriff stuff on the website. Thank you. That's great feedback. 100%
Sure.
Great feedback.
Can I just add one thing? I think when we talk to OIM about the flow chart, they may have some tweaks on that. And I don't know, I don't remember what they were, but if you could, either Greg or Matt may have a tweak on that flow chart to make it absolutely accurate. I don't remember.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Greg, could you get that to us soon? Just so we can make sure the right one's posted. Hey, we can't hear you, man.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay. So yeah, if whatever you guys send us, we can help you with any tweaks and stuff, since it sounds like there might be some changes you guys make, and then we'll take a look at that.
Okay. Elise, could you send that to Greg?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, feedback, comments?
Julia,
Go ahead.
I think what you mentioned about the other thing I was going to talk about, but I think that's going to be part of the executive session, is the legal issue about contemplation of discipline participation. So, and for us, we would like to see a city attorney opinion on it as well. So.
Yeah, I'm happy to invite you to our executive session for that discussion with Michelle. Helps for us to all be on the same page.
And I will ask, I actually do have a meeting right after this, so I'll let Armando inform me how the executive session goes, if you guys, Julie, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
I absolutely can't wait to hear what the city attorney says.
I know, bated breath for all of us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Are there other thoughts, comments, feedback? Go ahead, Katina.
I had just one final question. I want to very much thank Director Murphy and Armando, the team, for your engagement with this process and your commitment to really being better, not just looking better or saying you're getting better, but really being better. So thank you. My question is, do you think that you could share with us then what like a flow chart or something basic once it's built out of the new triage process? I think I'm happy to hear that you're going to start entering complaints into IA Pro, which was sort of the chief comment that we had, but it sounds like triage will be different, and I'm interested in knowing what that's going to look like. And in particular, I guess I also would love to understand how now it intersects with what the Sheriff's Department is doing with its GERT team. So, you know, when complaints are coming in, how is that all flowing to get us to a complaint is in IA Pro that is going to be discussed by, it sounds like, discussed by IAU and OIM to decide whether you should actually investigate it. That would be really wonderful.
Thank you, Katina.
Yes, ma'am. All the above. I think that would actually help all of us. So yeah, I think Armando, if you can add that
Yep.
to your list, and let's do it.
Yep.
Okay, last call for comments from the board.
I just want to say before I jump off that I appreciate this conversation. Appreciated. While, you know, I know that this in the past has been really tough, I think this has actually been an example of how it doesn't need to be that hard, to be honest. I think as long as we're all communicating and all willing to say, you know, what we are feeling and how it is, and being willing to be challenged, I honestly think that this is why COB and why the executive director's office is so important, because of conversations and challenges like this. And I think that even your memo, when you sent it and I read it through for the first time, I was like, oh yeah, a lot of that's reasonable. I could see that, and really just challenge some of my thought process. And so I just want to thank you all for that, but also say that this is truly an example of how our community, because we're all the Denver community, can work together. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And likewise from our part, appreciate you hearing our concerns and addressing them. And we look forward to, you know, engaging in a new level of data-driven conversation about these topics. And yeah, you know, the partnership really matters here, right? We can make all the recommendations in the world, but if you all don't do anything about them, what effect are we having? So really appreciate the partnership, and you know, we commit to continuing to engage with you on this. With that, I will close out this meeting and see you all in the executive session. And Daniel, if you can make sure that our Department of Safety folks have the link that they need, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we want to just highlight at a high level for the public what's going to be discussed in the executive session? Or
yeah, that the topic of conversation is the role of citizens, and I like to use the word resident more, but the role of residents in participating in the oversight process, along with the Department of Public Safety. So there is some debate about how public those meetings can be. And so that's the matter that we'll talk about with the city attorney's office in our next meeting. Go ahead.
Can I?
And just to add, and we're specifically going executive session for legal advice.
Thank you. Thank
you.
That part is so key to say, because you have to say that in order to go into executive session. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, really appreciate having lawyers on the board for that reason. Thank you so much. We are receiving legal advice. We are entering into executive session for that. Thank you so much. Have a great day.